Welcome everyone. Thanks for attending and joining us tonight and those online. We're fortunate tonight to have Alec Couchman from NZACS, Architectus Cooperative Society, and Melanie Lochore to talk about joint and several, or what the new regime might be all about. It's something that us architects have, I suppose, perhaps railed against for a long time. We've always or often looked for change. Tonight, I think, will be quite revealing. Maybe a case of be careful what you wish for. But Alec is running a little late, stuck in traffic, so Melanie will run through the first part of the presentation for us. Thank you.
I've got a...
Oh, you've got a mic.
I've got a mic. Thank you, everybody. Alec was going to start by talking a little more generally about NZACS, who we are, what we provide, and the reason that architects need professional indemnity insurance. So I'll talk to those slides while we wait for him. And then the focus of tonight is to talk in more detail about joint and several liability, our current system in New Zealand, how it works, what you need to be aware of in the current situation, and then some of the ideas or considerations that are being put forward by the government, what we do know, what we don't know about the potential change to a proportionate liability system. So he is definitely the expert in that, and we'll pick up on that discussion when he gets here. NZACS is the New Zealand Architects Cooperative Society, and many of you in the room will be members, but some will probably not be. We represent about 70% of the architectural practices in New Zealand, and were originally formed to seek PI insurance for architects in a collective way across New Zealand. And we spend a lot of our time also assisting our members with their risk management, so helping architects and our members understand how they can mitigate and minimise their risk in their professional practice. Why does professional indemnity insurance matter? It's not a legal requirement in New Zealand to hold it, but most architects do, and it is because the professional services that we provide come with inherent risk to them. Mistakes and errors that we make in our practices can lead to costly legal costs and also eventually settlements. Our PI cover covers our defence costs in court, which are often a high proportion of where the costs come from. And also compensation payments once you get past your excess layer. And on many projects, particularly commercial projects where you're entering into, say, for example, CCS contracts, holding professional indemnity insurance is a requirement for those. So in order to do that kind of work, you need to hold a certain level. What does it cover? Well, predominantly it covers professional negligence, so errors that you make in your day-to-day work or members in your team make. It covers civil liability, as I said, the legal defence costs that are associated with a claim being made against you or your practice. Damages and compensation, and also run-off cover. So as part of the NZACS scheme, we offer run-off cover for those members that are retiring once they've wound up their practice or they've retired from the profession. They are covered by complementary PI insurance. Some of the things that architects are caught out with in terms of negligence, or the ones that we see most commonly, come through the claims that we are associated with or help resolve design and documentation errors, incorrect or inadequate site analysis, and we're seeing a lot more of this. Oh, here's Alec. We're seeing a lot more of this with the densification of our cities, so sites that perhaps had a little more, a little less constraint to them and more room to move. We're seeing a lot of mistakes being made with services, covenants, things where people are not paying the due diligence at the beginning of the project on the sites, maybe not visiting the sites enough and observing the things that they need to be aware of. Providing misleading project cost estimation, and this is an area that architects often find themselves in trouble in, not necessarily, through their own fault, but either by not having the right consultants on board or not being upfront with clients at the beginning of projects around design brief, or scope creep that's not identified and addressed early on. So a lot of the claims that we see are from, I guess, what we would call disgruntled clients who feel like they can no longer afford the project that they thought they could. And incorrect certification is another one. Hi, Alec.
Hi.
We were just running through the first few slides. In terms of negligence, a lot of the things that we see are associated with inadequacies in the way that we are delivering our professional services. So, for example, not being knowledgeable enough about building regulations and planning controls, the knowledge of building materials and science. So it's important, and as a professional, with our duty of care, we're expected to be up to date with whatever's happening in the market. So if something's not performing, or there's been a trend that has been causing problems, I mean, an example would be, say, the Grenfell fire, specifying a product that has danger associated with it that's been in the press. We have a responsibility to be up to date and on top of the information that's available to us. The selection of builders and consultants, making sure we work with people who hold themselves to the same high standards that we do, contract administration, and construction observation. So, the focus here today is to talk about joint and several, and Alec's going to describe this diagram talks about how our current system works, and then Alec will talk through some of the ideas that are being considered by the government and how that might play out in the next year or two if those changes are made.
Cool. Thanks, Mel. Apologies for the lateness, a few late dramas at work, which means I didn't get out of the office in time to get here. So my apologies to everyone here and everyone online for not doing that. That's down to me. And thanks for Mel for stepping up at the last minute. And it just shows you the level of expertise we have on the board, and Mel's part of that. Currently, I don't know how much I explained this to people before, but under the current law, or the current legislation, we have what's called joint and several liability in this country. So basically, if you're involved in a project, you are 100% liable for everything that goes wrong, regardless of whether you did it or not. Okay? So if you have a contractor who's made a mess of your design and you haven't, in theory, been watching them closely enough, if they do make a mistake, in theory, you are liable for that loss. Okay? So even though you might only be 5% at fault, you are technically 100% liable for the whole of the damages. The classic and the most widely, probably the most public example of that is a contractor with a welding torch was on top of the convention center and he set fire to the insulation. And hence the most public demonstration of that. That contractor, do you think he's got enough PI cover or construction cover to rebuild a convention center? No, but everybody who was involved in that project, including Fletcher's, the architects, the engineers, everybody, the main contractor, are all, in theory, 100% liable for the loss that occurred as a result of that damage that was recorded there and the loss there. So it can be a little bit unfair, and it can be a little bit unfair especially on councils, because they are left literally holding the baby because they cannot escape liability. Okay? Something goes wrong, they go after the builder, he goes bust, the architect doesn't have enough PI cover to redo that project, and inevitably the legal profession will tend to focus on the council, and the councils cannot avoid that issue. All right? The most public example of that would be a development down in Queenstown. I won't name the people, but it was about a $200 million project, and it completely had to be rebuilt. In the end, the Queenstown Lake District Council took over the project and finished it off because it was cheaper for them to do that than try to fix the problems, because otherwise they would have had to cough up several $100 million. Press just one. So, as a result of that, councils have lobbied the government successfully, amongst others, and they've said literally we are way too exposed for every consultant and contractor who doesn't do their job properly. And I have some sympathy. We all know that councils can be difficult, but at the same time they're the ones who are to blame for every job that we design and builders build, right? And they don't get a say in how it's designed, they don't get a say in how it's built, but they are in reality liable for what we do and what we design and what the builders build, and they literally cannot escape that. So they are a little bit peeved, to say the least, and they've now successfully lobbied the government to get that changed. Okay, so there's a lot of detail on this that we don't know yet, but what we do know so far, that it is going to be introduced in early 2026, so in theory now-ish. They talk about a 10-year structural warranty being required for every project. Now, that raises a whole lot of questions about what is a structural warranty. Does it cover weather tightness? Does it, what does it, where does it stop and start? What does it exclude? What does it include, right? And they're talking about having a 1-year weather tightness warranty. Well, that's patently silly, and we will see if how that eventually that plays out. So what it means is that the council's risk profile will be greatly reduced, because in theory what the council will do is they will get your drawings, your design, they will approve them in theory, great set of drawings, looks perfect, meets the building code, charge you an enormous fee for doing that, send it back to you, and then in theory, if you built it exactly as you've drawn and designed it, and there's no flaws in it, it should be perfect, in theory. So if something goes wrong on site, then in theory, they've got very little risk associated with that. Because they said, we've done our job, we've checked your drawings, and they look perfect, as far as we can tell, and therefore their liability will be greatly reduced. So IMB is currently talking with NZIA and others about how the details are going to work out. I can't see this will change, because they'll take feedback, because there's a lot of people with a lot of opinions on this. Okay, they're now talking about having owner's insurance. So every project developer, every homeowner will have to have what they call project insurance, which will be a job-specific insurance. What they haven't really explained is, in theory, a homeowner and a developer or anyone who's doing a project, well, in theory, that insurance is going to have to extend for maybe 10, 15 years after the project is finished. And I'm not sure how they've fully understood that or fully explained that to the homeowners, everyone else. If they think it's a one-off payment, they're possibly dreaming, because it will extend, because your liability in theory could extend up to 10 years or more after roughly practical completion. So if you've got a job, starts on site, it's a reasonably large multi-story, say, apartment block, it might take 2 years to build, and then you've got another probably 10 years after that of liability, roughly. That's 12 years. And then there's the discovery period, which has become more relevant recently with the Becker Jasmax case down in Wellington with the BNZ building, where they've managed to extend that liability period potentially up to 12 to 15 years. So in theory, those owners may have to maintain that insurance for up to 10, 15, maybe a bit longer in terms of years. And the other option with this legislation that we know of is that they may opt out to becoming a building consent authority. So they can say, we don't like this, it's too risky. We're going to opt out. We're going to privatize it. We're going to go to private suppliers, or we're going to go to another council. Say Auckland Council will now be processing all of Waikato District Council's consents from now on, or something like that. I don't know how it's going to work. The theory is that a council can argue, from now on, all our consents will be processed in Auckland or Christchurch or wherever. Kind of back to the bad old days when that used to happen, when you had private consenting people. And they, to be fair, had interesting view on how much they should charge and how much scrutiny they did to your drawing. So again, we watch this space and see what comes out of that. But the potential is there that Auckland Council say, we may never do another building consent again. Okay?
I'm just wondering, Alec, if people, just in terms of how proportionate liability works and the difference between the joint and several and the proportionate, if people have got questions about the difference, or before we move on to the next slide, everybody understand how the proportionate works?
So what we do at the moment is proportional is obvious. If you've done a design and it's perfect and the builder's built it wrong, in theory the builder is 95% in the blame, because maybe your drawing wasn't 100% clear, that what you had actually drawn was really clearly, they could argue, oh, that was what you had detailed wasn't particularly correct, or you hadn't quite explained it properly, or something like that. So they might give you, okay, 5% your blame and 95% the builder. However, if you've designed a roof, a corrugated iron roof at a 1 degree pitch, and the builder's built it, the builder's going to go, well, no, I just built what you told me to build. And you've designed this building, which is clearly not compliant with the building code. Now, in that instance, you would argue the architects may be 50, 60, 70% responsible, and maybe the council for not picking it up might have a little bit of blame in there as well, because in theory they checked your drawings and said it was all okay. So council doesn't get away scot-free, but they get a much reduced level of risk of that. Whereas under liability, everybody in the room would have been 100% liable for that mistake. Even though you drew it, the builder, the argument is the builder should have picked it up and should have noticed. And then if your business practice had collapsed or gone into receivership or wound up, then the builder would be left carrying the can for your design error.
So the proportionate system works, the proposed new system, you would only be liable for the proportion of the error that was truly yours, whereas currently it really depends. Everybody's potentially liable for 100%, it just depends on who's still in the room when it's settled. So it will be, yes, it does sound good, and I think, a lot of people in the industry have been
advocating for that.
Advocating for proportionate liability, but the question is then there will be a lot more argument over what your proportion then is, because for every instance, who does decide? The courts will have to decide. Which percentage of that error belongs to the architect, which percentage belongs to the council, which percentage belongs to the contractor, for example, other consultants. So there could potentially be a lot more cost involved in the court process and a lot more time involved in the court process to establish that truth.
And it will be, and there will be, I'm bound to be, there'll be a signature case on this. Which case will be some
case law that has to be sort of developed.
Because all this is, it's all based on precedents, right?
Whereas what happens at the moment with the current joint and several is most often it's the consultants, architects and others, and the council who are still in operation, and they end up, settling on where the
money
costs
goes, comes from.
where the costs go. And so this move it could be of benefit to architects. It depends a little bit on the detail and how things are resolved, but really it's being driven by this desire to reduce the liability of councils, who at the moment do cover the majority of these errors that occur in the construction industry. And so that's a huge cost to them and a huge cost to the country. But someone at the end of the day, that cost has to be transferred somewhere else, and that's what the government will need to work through in order to bring this legislation in. And I think Alec's got a couple of slides about what that might look like, and as architects, I guess what we need to do in the meantime, which is not actually very different from what we're doing at the moment, just to be, I guess, cognizant of these changes. Or proposed changes.
NZACS proportionate liability now, but the NZACS agreement, does that still have clients?
You can contract it, but I don't know that it's an AAS.
I don't think you can. That would be highly... Put it this way, we haven't seen one yet. Okay? I mean, you could try, and that would be something that you could try, but there's going to be an overlap period for about 10, 15 years. Because you can have all those projects which are literally being built now, will be under J&S, under joint and several, and they'll finish up in a year's time, or 2 years, or 3 years' time, and they'll still be under the old regime, and the new regime will come in, and there's going to be a messy 10-year, decade, literally, of a messy period where it's all going to be, are we doing this under joint and several, or are we doing this under proportional liability?
Probably, don't you think, like for architects, we're probably the ones who are going to experience the least change, because we already have PI insurance, we already have levels that we're comfortable with for the risk that we're taking on at the moment. The bigger change is going to be for councils, whose risk will reduce a lot and liability will reduce a lot, but the big questions are around how homeowners and contractors pick up all of the council risk, because it's going to have to be covered somehow.
I think, they're talking about whether there's various, who's going to pick up the tab, basically. Now, you can understand from a government's perspective why this would be quite popular, because ratepayers are going, why should I, as a ratepayer, be funding the council to pick up all this, be blamed for all this work that's happening and defective work, and I'm, as a ratepayer, funding the council to then, finish off these buildings because they're leaky or they're badly designed or whatever. So, as a vote winner, I can see why they've done it. Okay, so there's a little bit of politics in there.
Just a question from the chat. Will this leave clients at greater risk as they may not be able to recoup costs, i.e. if the builder is 95% to blame and they go bust?
Yes. Short answer.
That's right.
So that's where they're now talking about having owner's insurance, right? And they're saying that this might be 0.5% increase to the project value, approximately. They're guessing. They don't know. But ironically, I thought 0.5%, that sounds awfully familiar. That's kind of round about the ballpark of what architects' fees generally are. I mean, we can vary, obviously, between 2% and 11%, depending who you are. But it's ironic that they're talking about a 0.5% increase in project costs to fund the homeowner's insurance or the building or the developer's insurance. So they had something similar in Australia, and it varies state by state. And there's pluses and minuses, and some issues of that very issue about contractors going bust. If they're bust, Teak Construction went into liquidation today. So who's going to pick up the tab if one of their projects they just finished, right? So it doesn't really get you out of the room to an extent, but it's I don't know if they fully thought it through.
I think these are the things that we can look to Australia and see what's happened there, but these are things that aren't clear. We're not clear how those things are going to be resolved here. And that's why I guess it being introduced right now doesn't seem feasible.
The other one is they're talking about compulsory professional indemnity insurance on all designers. So with most architects, I would say, I don't know, 95% probably have PI cover of some sort, I believe, I hope. So to architects, it generally won't be a huge-ish change, but for all those drafting firms or smaller practices which don't carry PI cover, in theory, they won't be able to design a building.
What about master builders, like getting the contractors to take on more
design? That's possible. They feel as though they'll be exposed anyway. In fact, the master builders will be saying, well, we're going to be even more exposed now because council's not there to pick up the tab. Yeah. I know. So this is quite a huge change.
They already have a 10-year structural guarantee, so if you are a master member, if you are not a master member, you're now going to have to give 15 years. So that's already the cost of it, still what you normally used to. But for the registered masters, it's no different.
I'm just thinking more of them should be.
Absolutely.
The master builders. Well, the master builder's guarantee doesn't really cover the cost of a major problem. It's my view on it. And they also it's a voluntary organisation. It's not a QA. You can pay enough money and get a cursory check, and you become a master builder. I've seen it done.
That's actually
But we could.
There is a huge QA process that they go through to become a master builder.
Mm-hmm. So.
They have to be financially audited, they have to have their work checked, and they have to be in business for a certain amount of years. It's not just paying money and get it.
It's okay. It's we'll get off track. I have my own.
Should we go to the next slide, Alec?
Yeah, we'll talk about it, but we can talk about it. But yeah, there's issues with master builders that in theory should have covered that gap. But in my view and in my experience, it hasn't covered that potential area of being setting a standard for builders. It's got too many exclusions. It's too loose. It's self-checking, all that kind of stuff. But it hasn't got a third-party audit. There's all that. But anyway, we'll go on that.
Just to summarise, then I think there's going to be unintended consequences, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think notably you and I talked about it, or we talked about it here tonight, before the emphasis might become a little bit more focused on architects because the umbrella of the council is no longer there. So the architect may have to carry a higher degree of...
That is a possibility that architects will be carrying, they'll be saying, well, you might have to carry 2 million instead of 1 million PI cover. Don't forget that most insurance companies in New Zealand will not insure beyond 10 million. Okay, unless you're I don't know. Well, the very large firms in this country, the big engineering firms, self-insure. So in theory, they have no insurance cover because they're too big or they're too international. So the WSPs of this world technically don't have insurance because they self-insure. So they'll be good. Yeah, we got 10 million PI cover, no problem. We got 20 million PI cover. So you have a catastrophic event like the fire at the convention centre. Nobody can cover that because nobody's got enough money, PI cover, for that potential level of disaster. But don't forget that that's an outlier. That's an absolute once-in-a-lifetime kind of happening, right? Most claims and most issues with PI cover are generally within a reasonable range of anywhere between $5,000 and $100,000. It's they got the window in the wrong place. The roof leaks, we need to replace the roof, we need a bit of cladding done. The biggest claim that I'm dealing with at the moment as an expert witness is $1 million for a house rebuild. It leaks, but the builder's put his hand up and said, look, I'm to blame. He did a lot of dodgy things, but the architect had full observation role and didn't pick it up. So everyone's kind of negotiating at the moment about who's going to pay for what. And I think we'll get it over the line because I think the architect had about 2 million PI. But when it gets to that catastrophic scale, you just can't. Nobody has got enough.
Rather exceptional case, isn't it?
What's that?
Fire is a rather exceptional case.
Is it? It's an outlier. It's a complete outlier.
Everything.
Yeah. The convention centre is a
We lost
yeah.
Victoria Park Market. The supermarket.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. The biggest thing would be around the weather tightness thing. That'll be the biggest. Architects just have to get this right. We cannot be designing buildings which leak. I mean, it's just fundamental.
And redoing it. How many buildings have been remediated and they still leak?
Sorry, I can.
How many buildings have been remediated and then
Oh.
it's not good enough and then that's leaking?
That leaks and
It's just layer upon layer.
well, funny enough, T Construction did a lot of that kind of work, and they obviously couldn't make it stack up as a business.
Shall we keep going?
So it's and doing that remediation type work is
questions.
I would say you have to have
Move to the
really
next.
you have to be really specialised almost, and there are firms that do that. We all know that.
I think we've talked through most
sorry.
of those, but do you want to keep?
So what it means for us is that PI and PL still required. There's no change for most of us. Councils will be less exposed. Consultants, technically, more exposed. The other thing is about councils is if they're no longer, they want to reduce their liability, why would you bother with inspections? Because you could say, you just stamp the drawings in theory, desktop review, you issue a massive invoice with your council work, and then you don't go to site. You've just reduced your liability by a huge amount. So my argument would be that councils would probably try to actually stop doing inspections on site and just relying on the so-called profession and the builders and the architects to do that. But that's just me speculating. But I can't see why councils would want to now take on-site inspections. It will technically raise the bar for those who are non-architects, architectural designers, LBP designers. It technically will, because they will have to now start being a lot more thorough, having PI insurance, which will raise their fee levels because they've got to pay for that. So in theory, it could raise the bar. It will definitely be an additional cost to the owners, which will put pressure on architects' fees. Because the owner's going, I've got to pay 0.5% of this $100 million job just to get some insurance cover. So please, Mr. or Mrs. Architect, can you please reduce your fee to help me pay for this additional cost? I'm just saying that's... So that's kind of like, where I'm just thinking these are the possible considerations that you might want to think about. And the premiums might change. So insurance companies go, well, wait a minute, that architecture firm is going to be a little bit more exposed now, so do they raise their premiums? I don't know the answer to all these questions. These are things that we were talking about and discussing with NZIA about how this new legislation is going to happen. And don't forget that this joint and several will still last for another 10 years. And this will come in, it will be for any new projects coming in, probably by 2027, we'll have this kind of, these issues to deal with. Alrighty? Okay. So what should you do? Do all the good things that we know we're supposed to do on a job. Good practice means written agreements, maintaining appropriate insurance levels, and good record keeping. Okay? All the stuff that we're supposed to do, and I know all of you do 100% of the time on every job that comes into your office. I know you do all this, so I don't need to tell you. Yeah. So thank you very much. Thanks to Mel for stepping up, and my apologies to Mel for doing that to you. And yeah.
We're just wondering if, it would be quite good if people have questions about this or even potentially other things that they'd like to ask about. Yeah.
So just a little bit of housekeeping. You need to speak into the mic, otherwise everyone at home doesn't know what we're talking about. So if you want to say something, Adam will bring the mic to you, just so that otherwise we have to repeat what the question was.
Okay, thanks, Claire.
Alec and Mel and mic'd up.
Okay. So if you want to grab the mic, please, mate.
Thanks. Can you hear me? You've talked about joint and several changes with regards to PI. What about PLI? Because PLI levels are a lot higher.
Yep.
How's that going to work with the new changes?
Sorry, talking about PL or PI, sorry?
So we've talked about PI,
Yep.
right? Does the change to the joint and several liability impact PLI? And how?
PL.
Because it's a different type of insurance and it comes with a different level of...
Yeah, I understand.
commitment.
I understand that. So there's two main types, PI and PL, right?
Yeah.
PI, professional indemnity insurance,
Yeah.
pretty much is what you pay your massive invoice for every financial year, right? Because that's the one that's got the most danger, if you like, attached to it. Okay. Public liability in New Zealand is relatively cheap. In fact, it's very cheap because very few claims are made against it for architects because we don't really get into that realm. So there's very few, and that's reflected in the in your invoice that you receive from your insurer. Your PI, I guarantee you, your PI invoice that comes from your insurer is a pretty hefty number, depending on the size of your practice, whereas your public liability insurance is tiny by comparison, and that reflects the relative number of claims or number of payouts that they've had to make on those two prospective policies. So will it change it? I mean, joint and several now has been well established in New Zealand, and so the levels that are currently at are probably going to, unless something happens like someone invades another country or bombs the Middle East to pieces, that'll probably stay more or less the same. I can't imagine. There hasn't been a huge shift in recent years. Under this new regime, you've got some very big players in the market, NZI, Lloyd's of London, Aon, who are a worldwide company. They will do their own math and work out whether it's still a good thing or not, or whether we're going to be more or less exposed. So I'm sorry, I know it's not a straightforward answer, but there are. The good thing about architects is that as a profession, we generally have PI cover. That's the most important thing. We generally do a higher level of service. We generally provide a more experienced, we do all the larger buildings in the country generally. So there's a huge level of experience and a huge level of trust in that sense. And the insurance companies generally understand that. Okay. So hopefully your short answer is hopefully not. Okay. Does anyone else have anything to talk about? Did you want to say something? I know you talking about. Okay, sorry. So, all in all, I know Grant at NZIA has been working with IMBI, and he hopefully will be able to update us if he finds out anything in particular. So we will see how that goes. Do you want to have something to say?
I can probably update you on that one.
Right. I had a brief meeting with MB this morning.
Yep.
Where they updated on that. Didn't have a lot of detail to add. Basically, it was that the PI insurance is going to be mandatory, which is. It really doesn't really affect architects because we mostly have insurance on that, so that's not too much of a concern. What it will affect is the other designers and presumably LBPs that are working in that space as well. So that's at least some good news. In terms of when this happens, they were talking about second quarter of this year because they have a deadline there, obviously with elections coming up, and they've got a mandate to push that through. They echoed the cost of this is to shift from the council through to basically the owner. That's what it is. Yep. And they're looking at about 0.5%, which is what was consistent what you were talking about there. I guess from the other side also is the question for us is, who else is going to pick up those things on there? And they were talking about this insurance, which is basically an owner insurance. Mm-hmm. And I asked the question of how that's going to be. I mean, would you buy a 10-year policy or a 12-year policy to go through to the 10-year long stop, that's currently under the building NZBC. They didn't really have an answer to that. I think that's something that they're working through. I also asked them if they had discussions with insurance about whether there was products going to be available for that. They said they have had some discussions with it, and their understanding is there were products available for that. But at the end of the day, I think this is very much a work in progress for them, and I think they are struggling a little bit for it, to be honest, as I think we all are, to understand that. And I think we'll just have to watch that space and see how they go. They did say that the other thing also is in terms of the PI insurance, they were looking to maybe mandate a value on that, and suggested that that probably wasn't a brilliant idea. If you look at Architects on there, we have under the AS, we've got a $250,000 number in there.
Yep.
And that's simply done because we've got about 4,000 architects around New Zealand that are members of NZA who use our contracts, etc. And a lot of them own smaller practices there, and so that 250,000 might be okay for them. A lot of practices have more PI insurance. They might have $500,000 or $1 million or the likes, etc. there. And so what I suggested to MB was that dictating a value like that is probably not going to be extremely helpful, because you don't want to have a mandate going out there for $1 million when you're doing small works, etc., where your insurance might only be $500,000, and that means that you've got an extra cost that's going to be put onto a practice on that. I think they took that on board, but I think what they want to do is to have a baseline that everybody can work to. So that was really the feedback that we got there. So I think it's just watch the space and see what's happening from there.
Yeah. It all comes down to how much architects are willing, or builders in the profession as a rule, are willing to pick up that slack that council's now dropping out, which literally were a bottomless pit of money, to be fair, in effect. So that will certainly change the attitude of builders and architects in terms of and owners. If this building is half built and that builder goes bust, who am I going to get to pay for this? So I think the biggest change will be homeowners and developers and anyone who's building a project having that level of PI or PL and even construction insurance. Because contractors, they have a whole range of construction insurance that is beyond what architects do. So there's that is definitely going to be for builders and contractors and even subcontractors. There will have to be a whole different attitude towards insurance and what they provide, which in theory will drive up costs, but who knows? Who knows? So I think watch this space, and in theory, when it all comes out in this year, we'll have a much clearer idea. So, yeah, and NZIA will surely be leading the charge at some point. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Okay. Once again, apologies for my lateness. It's sometimes tricky getting across Auckland after you've had a drama at your office. So.
And if there are any other sort of areas that you would like to get together and discuss in this forum, feel free to reach out to Claire, who's the chair of the Auckland branch, Kevin, and we're happy to organise further discussions that are of interest or things that are kind of on your mind.
Grant here, and say NZACS, Mel and myself, you're welcome to contact us if you want to, if you've got a question, and Grant's always available at 24/7, and well, allegedly, and we can usually sort out most problems, most issues, at least put you on the right direction anyway. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you very much.